Well, good evening, and welcome to our community conversation on law enforcement and post-use of force incidents. My name is Vincent Harding, and I will serve as the moderator tonight. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here, and I want to thank everyone that is watching us via live stream as well. I also want to thank ACC Eastview as well as our volunteers from the party for all of their help. Let me start by giving an outline for tonight. There will be three main portions of the evening. Part one, a discussion with our panelists on a variety of current issues involving law enforcement and how we build community trust. Part two, a presentation by Chief Manley, who will explain APD's process after a use of force incident occurs. This will be followed by a presentation by District Attorney Moore, who will explain the process the DA's office takes after a use of force incident occurs. And then part three, a panel discussion driven by you, the community, as we will take questions from the audience. So if you're using social media, whether here in person or watching online, please use the hashtag CCATX. But before we go further, I want to take a moment to remember those we have lost as a result of use of force incidents. Will we please bow our heads for a moment of silence? Thank you. So a few years ago, the party for the first time in years called on the Austin Police Department to address racial disparities that existed, whether it be in the types of people that had their cars stopped, searched, or use of force incidents that took place. At that time, if an individual was stopped by APD, if you were white, you had a 1 in 22 chance of having your car searched. But if you were Latino, you had a 1 in 9 chance of having your car searched. And if you were African American, you had a 1 in 6 chance of having your car searched. So we identified 4 key policy areas to focus on. 1, body cameras. 2, community policing. 3, improving de-escalation tactics. And 4, increasing use of non-lethal force. With each of those 4 policy goals, I believe APD has taken positive steps forward, and I want to thank the police department and Chief Manley for their work. For years, the district attorney's office had not indicted an officer for the killing of an unarmed individual or for other uses of force. It changed with the horrific death of Larry Jackson Jr. In that particular case, that case has gone back and forth in the legal aspects in the last couple of years, and now it is being appealed all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And since being sworn in, DA Moore has sought and received 2 indictments when it comes to law enforcement officials. But I want to be clear. I believe the community never wanted indictments for the sake of indictments, but for officers to be held accountable for their actions and treated the same as everyone else. No one should be above the law, including law enforcement officers. So I want to focus on this conversation tonight. I hope that you all will learn a whole lot, and the goal is that we continue to move forward with this conversation. So with that being said, let me go ahead and introduce our panelists for tonight. First up, we have Councilmember Delia Garza. We have Criminal Defense Attorney Amber Vasquez Bodie, Travis County Commissioner Jeff Trevelyan, NAACP President Nelson Linder, Measure Austin President Mimi Stiles, Chief Brian Manley, and District Attorney Margaret Moore. Would you please give them a hand? First up, Chief Manley, you were in the number 2 spot for years at APD and now are the chief. Talk to us a little bit about your philosophy when it comes to policing and how we build community trust.
You know, I think when it comes to building community trust, they're buzzwords, but they have to be the philosophy of the department. And first and foremost, it has to be engagement. We have to be willing to get out, get in the community, work with the community to build that trust, because trust takes a long time to earn, but you can lose it in a moment. And a lot of that is going to be done through open and honest communication and being as transparent as possible. So we're making changes in the department, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on tonight, in the way in which we engage with the community, the way in which we open ourselves up to the community, instead of just being in certain locations for the community to come to meet with us, really making efforts to get out into the community. So when I talk about my philosophy, and again, I know I have 100 seconds, so I'm doing my best here to keep my answer very short. It really is focused on relationships, because trust is built on relationships, and relationships are built on communication, and it has to be honest. So it really is just ensuring that everyone in the department understands the philosophy of being as open and putting out as much information as we can to clear up those misunderstandings that oftentimes is where the mistrust or the distrust begins.
Well, thank you, Chief Manley, and thank you for keeping us all in line with the 100 seconds. So we'll stay with that.
I'm a rule follower by trade.
District Attorney Moore, you are a former county attorney and county commissioner. You are now our district attorney. Can you please talk a little bit about your vision for law enforcement and building community trust?
I would say that most of it is what you just heard from Chief Manley. The district attorney's office has a very special role, in my opinion, and that is to see that justice is done. We have that duty, and it's in Texas law, and I think it's a moral duty as well. So for me, the district attorney's office has to demonstrate to the community that we have impeccable integrity when it comes to our prosecutorial decision-making, that we make our decisions based upon the law and the facts, and that we very carefully and thoroughly explain to the community the basis on which we make those decisions. It's been my experience in government through a lot of years now that if we can all come to an understanding of what the facts are and what the law is, we typically can walk away from the table understanding each other. And I think that's fundamental to this community's belief in its justice system.
Well, thank you. And we'll continue the conversation about community trust. Let's talk a little bit about community policing. Measure Austin President Stiles, talk to us a little bit about the work you've done about moving from the abstract of community policing to actually defining community policing.
Well, I'd be remiss to not point out that I sat across from Chief Manley about 2.5 years ago, very angry, right? Very angry at the state of what it looked like for people that looked like me. Today, I'm much more optimistic. When you talk about community policing, you know, after that conversation, that fun conversation, I would say, because it led to a solution of my creation of Measure Austin, which is it's basically a nonprofit that's comprised of researchers and advocates that just want to see social good. And from there, we have, came to a definition per se of community policing, and we needed to do that because, especially right now, I mean, we see the community policing. People think that's like a picture of a cop playing with a boy, right, or taking a basketball. But instead, community policing to Measure Austin is the neighborhood's ability to mitigate crime and build relationship, whereas the officer is no longer just the law enforcer, but also a key stakeholder. So that's what we see as community policing. It's a revolving door. It's us talking. It's us working together in order to achieve that goal.
Thank you. And Commissioner Trevelyan, as the former president of the NAACP and now an elected official, talk about how you can bridge the gap maybe between the community and law enforcement.
Well, I think that there are a number of bridges that we have to build. I think first we start looking at neighborhoods themselves. You know, when you look at the fact that the median price of a home in Austin has now gone up to $400,000, you look at a lot of folks who traditionally have been Austinites and community members for years being pushed out. So what we've got to look at our communities, we've got to look at our neighborhoods and schools, and first of all, stabilize them for the families that are there. And then secondarily, look at the places, particularly our Title I schools, where you look at the latchkey hours, 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. When I was a youngster, we interacted with law enforcement more. They were neighbors, they were relatives, they were people that went to church with us. We have got to get back to that type of venue, and to do that, we've got to first think about where we live, housing, what types of programs we put together to address those issues. And then we've got to create venues at schools where officers interact with kids who don't look like them on a regular basis in preparation for being better officers. It's only when officers see kids as they see their kids, and when kids see officers as they see their parents and community members, that we ultimately deal with the core issues that are addressing our communities.
That's a great point, Jeff, talking about the humanity of everything. Now I want to ask a question to Councilmember Garza. You're the first Latina on the Austin City Council. Oftentimes when we have this conversation, it takes on an African-American dynamic in the police, but oftentimes Latinos are still disproportionately treated when it comes to stops, searches, and use of force. Can you talk a little bit about the realities that exist and how do we move things forward?
Well, I think some of the realities that exist are that we all carry biases, and that it's important that we recognize that and we acknowledge that, and then we can move forward. As you stated in your opening comments, the numbers on how people of color are pulled over or searched once they're pulled over at different rates. Why is that? It's important to understand that. I think some of the other realities, the city has some policies and laws now that have disparate impact on minorities. One that was recently discussed before council was the juvenile curfew. It had the best intentions, but it's not doing what we thought it was going to do. And in fact, it's putting our juveniles into the criminal justice pipeline. And I think it's important that we look at those kinds of policies and make sure we're changing that. There was a time maybe when that was thought to be a good idea, but times have changed. I think at some other realities, for example, when we're dealing with the budget, the city budget, there are portions of my district that feel over-policed, but then there are also portions of my district that feel that there's not enough police presence. So it's very hard, as a council member, trying to balance and make sure those communities that feel over-policed don't feel that way, and those that feel that there needs to be more presence feel that way. And also, concern always with our budget and how a significant amount is allocated to public safety. Also having that balance, though, that it is important that we have a safe community. I think the way we move forward is we continue having honest conversations like this. I think the cities, we've implemented the equity office, and I think this new 10-1 council really has not been a rubber stamp when it comes to the budget. We don't just take budget recommendations and say, okay, you need 50 more police officers, we're going to give them to you. I think this council has asked the tough questions and make sure we balance the needs throughout the city as well as the need of keeping our city safe.
Thank you. Now I want to go to Nelson Linder. You've been advocating for change for quite some time now. So talk to us a little bit about what are some tangible actions that we can take to help solve the problem?
Thank you. I think it starts with how we describe the problem. We talk about conversations, building bridges, and that's a good conversation. But the truth is, until we enforce the 14th Amendment, which gives us all equal protection of the law, we're not going to solve this problem. It starts with accountability. And the truth is, in Austin and in this country, we're not holding law enforcement accountable, especially when it comes to black people, brown people, and other minorities. So that's really the conversation. And I'll maintain that if we do that, we hold people accountable, we can take care of the rest. As far as changes, look at these state systems, these state penal codes that have created an antiquated system where police officers have too much protection. I mean, who gives a damn if you believe something is right? What is the reality? Is it right or wrong, or what are you seeing? That's a personal perspective. We have to change that and hold law enforcement more accountable on the state level and on national level. If we do that, folks like fairness. So we have to start with the system itself. We don't have any indictments. Well, we actually had one in 2003, but a guy I won't name threw it out. That was Jesse Owens' case, because he felt like it was not substantial. We have to be very, very honest. The system that guides this process is antiquated and unfair and is biased. Until we change that system, we're not going to achieve equality in policing. The good news is our last president created a national task force based on best practices. He challenged the city government, the community, and law enforcement to do best practices. It's a roadmap. If we did that, We can solve a lot of problems, but again, at the end of the day, it's all about accountability.
Thank you. We'll transition just a little bit. We want to go to our criminal defense attorney. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the changes you want to see from law enforcement?
Well, so I agree with what everybody said on the panel, and obviously we are making progress. But I watch hundreds of use of force and police videos every day and have for the last 14 years, as well as all my other colleagues in criminal defense. This is what we do, and evaluate use of force policies and the procedures. Now, I think I can speak for most of the people that watch the videos with me. We see two Austins. We see the way that people are treated in one part of town that is distinctly different than the other. I mean, they can break up a fight club in Westlake and nobody gets arrested. My guy gets shaken down for wearing shorts walking down 12th Street. He's a young black dude and ends up having to join on him. I can't fathom a world, and have I never seen anybody shaken down in Terrytown for wearing shorts. There's just two worlds. And even the most liberal progressive friends of mine that love to see things forward can't wrap their mind around what it's like on the other side, on the have-not side. It is a different world in how you're treated by law enforcement. And it's not conscious, and it's not on purpose. And we see, I think the chief is absolutely on the right direction, focusing on de-escalation, but we're not seeing the numbers to support it. I think it's a twofold thing that needs to go even further. I think that we look at San Francisco's model or Salt Lake City that's virtually eliminated police killings with a radical use of de-escalation procedure and training on mental health. That's where we have to go, and we have to give teeth and claws to the police monitor's office. Right now, there is no accountability, and our weakest and most marginalized people in our community really don't have an avenue to complain. So the complaints, I would say, is 1/10 of what there really are.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I'll go right back to you. How can the community learn more about their legal rights?
Well, and that's a challenge, and I think that goes to a lot of the stuff that, again, the Chief and Margaret were talking about getting out in the community and understanding. And I think that there is, for instance, I have a lot of mentally ill clients which comprise 1/4 of all use of forces. We know this, and a lot of it is there's misunderstandings. They think they're calling for help. I can't tell you how many times somebody's called for help and said, you know, my boyfriend's having a meltdown. I don't know what to do. You know, they go out to wherever they're living, and depending on where they live really dictates how it goes down, because, you know, when officers come with drawn guns, because they're scared. They hear yelling. They hear stuff going crazy. It's just, they're protecting themselves, but in a human range, it's so much easier to escalate unless you have really specific training on de-escalating that situation, or sending a mental health professional, as opposed to having those avenues outside of police to deal with the mental health issues. So I think that getting the information to a lot of people about how you do that is part of the problem. And I think maybe the city can take a more active role on educating the communities about other resources.
And let me follow up on that point. Chief Manley, how would you respond to some of the concerns that Amber raised?
As far as educating the community on their rights and de-escalation and treatment in different parts of the city, sure. I think, you know, de-escalation is a buzzword in the industry right now, but I would tell you de-escalation is something that's built into all the different aspects of our training academy. We actually do have a course that's on de-escalation, and, you know, our philosophy is that de-escalation is something that begins the moment the officer arrives on scene, because our first level of force for the police department is just the mere fact that we're showing up in this uniform, and we know that. And then it's how we choose to initiate that initial conversation. And so we're working right now as a police department to address the issue of de-escalation. We have all seen in this community videos from either across the country or videos that unfortunately are Austin Police Department videos where we didn't do our best at de-escalation, and we know where that can take things. So we are focused on ensuring we're giving the best training in de-escalation, but in regards to some of the discussions that our panel members have had to this point as well with biases, we're also rolling out the Fair and Impartial Police Training Program throughout the entire department. And by the end of August, every Austin Police Department will have gone through Fair and Impartial Policing, which forces them to address their own biases, where they may come from and how they may impact the way that they think, with the obvious goal of making sure that they don't impact how they act. And then as far as the treatment, different treatment across the different parts of Austin, and I'm getting the stop signal here, but we do track all of the data that we have, and maybe in a future question I'll talk about what we're trying to do as far as being more specific as where the stops are occurring, where the searches are occurring, and why maybe some of the numbers are not in alignment with population numbers.
Well, thank you. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the current issues that have come up recently. And one of those in particular is the backlog on rape kits and the mold on the rape kits. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on and what's the plan moving forward?
Certainly. When I took over on December 1st, that was actually the first significant act that I took was closing the DNA operations in the lab based on some of the challenges that we had. It just seemed like it was where we had to start the process of fixing things. At that point, we had, when we started, we had just over 3,900 kits in our backlog. Realize that these are kits that dated back to the early 90s, and that these are kits that may have been tied to cases that were already prosecuted and the kit was not needed for evidence in that case, or it may have been a case that did not move forward for prosecution, either because it was not strong enough or because the victim did not wish to seek prosecution. That being said, the evidence in that kit, although it may not have been needed for that case, still represented a victim and also still represented the possibility for law enforcement to link that case to a future offense that might have occurred where the offender was unknown. So we realized that this was something that we needed to address, and it was a national problem. So we were fortunate that we got a grant through the Danny Group, the DA of New York, and we have sent over 1298 is the number of kits we've sent out right now. So we're working our way through the backlog right now. I also reassigned 4 detectives into our sex crimes unit, because to simply send all of these kits out for processing and then to get all of the results back from these kits, all we've done is we've just moved the problem further along in the process. If I don't have additional investigators available to take those returns that we're getting and then process them if there's more work that needs to be done. So that's another step that we've taken towards fixing this, is we've assigned more resources towards clearing up the backlog once we actually get the kits back from being tested.
Okay, thank you. And I know on this same topic when it comes to evidence, Commissioner Trevelyan, recently the issue came up with the DNA lab here. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on and the problems that you see?
Well, I have to be careful. I'm told I'm a little sensitive about this issue. Let me just say that what I am most interested in as a professional is process. You know, unfortunately, what got us here is clearly there's a set of forensic standards that were not followed. Now, sometimes we deal with chain of command as opposed, and what I think we found, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, is the chain of command at the police department decided how things were going to be done, not forensic specialists. That should never happen when we're dealing with evidence. Evidence should be handled by experts. It should be handled in an antiseptic manner. It should be handled in a way that both the prosecution and the defense can be confident that what is presented is pure. That didn't happen here. There was a breakdown, and it was clear. I think when you accept that as a reality, I think Nelson's right on point here. Problem definition and accountability standards are absolutely necessary. And in order to get there, you have to build a specific project plan of the types of actions, who's going to be responsible, when they're going to be responsible, a blueprint from getting from point A to point B. We have gone a little too long without a defined blueprint, in my estimation. And I think that the project team has been a little more state or prosecution-oriented than the entire continuum. So I've suggested that we bring in the civil rights community, the ACLU, the NAACP, LULAC, and others, the Texas Civil Rights Project, and a number of defense attorneys who ultimately can test at every stage to make sure that there's a balance, to make sure that we don't have a one-sided analysis, because if you look at things from one perspective, the outcomes that you will get will be from one perspective as well. And I think we protect ourselves, we protect our community, and we create the confidence that is necessary in our process by making sure that the whole continuum is represented.
Well, thank you for that explanation, Jeff. That was great, and I know that was insightful for everyone here as well. As a policymaker, it's good to see you pushing for the changes that you think are necessary. Councilmember Garza, you helped push for body cameras along with the mayor and some other council members. There was an initial purchase of over $2 million and then an additional multi-million-dollar contract that has now been halted because of a lawsuit. Can you talk to us a little bit about where we are on that body camera purchase?
Well, the city was able to find another avenue despite the lawsuit I think the lawsuit's in an appeals process. I know that the final decision was a little bit narrower and didn't stop I don't think it stopped the contract, but the city was able to find another avenue to purchase those body cameras because there was a clear directive from the community saying that this was a good thing, that it helps with transparency and accountability. And so thankfully we were able to find another way, and it's my understanding there will be a couple of deployments at the end of this year. I'm sure the chief could speak to that more, but I believe the first round of the new cameras will start to be deployed throughout the different substations. I know some are being used now, but I believe they're a little bit older, and some of this new purchase will replace that.
Thank you for that update. Mimi, you've been working with Black Pflugerville, and one of the issues that came up was school discipline. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you found and kind of where we go from there?
Sure. So everything starts with my kids. I got to be completely honest here. There was an issue with my son at school, and I was called in, and the principal, and mind you, my son is like Steve Urkel, like he doesn't do anything wrong. I'm one of those parents, right?
I can confirm this.
Absolutely true. And I was told that my son, made a girl fall, and he could be charged with assault, right? My son is 11 years old. So when someone tells me that, I then go to crazy mom mode and want to know, right, how many kids are being charged with assault? How many parents had to come into this conversation like me, right? So what I ended up doing was with Black Pflugerville and with Measure Austin, we asked for those numbers, and we found out that, yes, Black kids were disproportionately being charged with assault at Pflugerville ISD. And it's not just a Pflugerville problem. This is a national issue. So what we decided to do was go to work, and this is the model, right? This is community policing. This is reaching out to Chief Jessica Robledo, who is fabulous, bringing her into Black Pflugerville, and then also holding the school board accountable, having the school board also with us, and so that we're able to dig down into the data and actually put a name and a face, not always a name for kids, but a face to each statistic. Every time we talk about these statistics, we say, oh, a certain percent, is being impacted, but we don't understand that each percent is a person. And so that's what Black Pflugerville is doing. That's just one thing that Black Pflugerville is doing.
Well, amen.
Yeah.
Nelson, from a legal standpoint, what are some changes you want to see with Texas law as it relates to use of force?
Let me give you a perfect example. In the 403rd Judicial District Court in 2003, the court that had the Jesse Owens Jr. case. This is a grand jury. They said when they looked at the city, there was still a different standard for Black and brown people in terms of law enforcement in this city. That Black and brown folks are being treated very differently. They challenged every institution, city council, DA's office, community organizations, to to enforce the 14th Amendment. That grand jury got an indictment. But guess what? A district attorney named Ronnie Earl basically went to a judge and said it was technically insufficient, which is my point. Going forward to the Larry Jackson case, Jr. case, grand jury got an indictment. A judge named Earl Leroy Yackel said, wait a minute, there's a statute from 1890, immunity clause. We're not addressing that. This is not about training. If it was training, we wouldn't be having this conversation. This is about race, accountability, and enforcement. What I'm saying is two things. One, it's okay, you can applaud. I'm not going to bite you. At least not yet. The Texas Penal Code needs to be changed, 9.51. As long as you can talk about somebody being objectively reasonable when they're being subjectively unreasonable and get away with it, we're in trouble. Look at these cases happening in Austin all around the country, no indictments. You see, we talk about a problem. Don't tell me about this training mess. I'm sick of hearing that. Let's talk about enforcement and accountability, a common standard for everybody. And finally, as our former police chief said during the David Joseph killing, the Penal Code says there's no duty to retreat. Why not? Why can't you retreat if you use safe practices and protect somebody's life? Why can't you retreat? It's okay to retreat. But if you're taught it in the Penal Code, use it in court, it's not going to happen. Again, accountability and enforcement. If you do that, we have more peace in our communities, more respect, and more trust. If we're not talking about accountability and enforcement, we're wasting our time. Yes, I'm being very subjective.
Well, thank you for that explanation, Nelson. I know that is something that has been looked at for a while, Texas Penal Code, and I don't think it'll be changing with this current makeup of the legislature, but maybe at some point in the future. Amber, you talked a little bit about mental health. Can you talk to us about your experiences working with those that may have had a mental health illness? And what would you recommend from our policymakers and law enforcement officers to make sure that we help serve this community?
I want to answer that, but quickly, I want to say the Texas Forensic Science report that was released last year was 100% clear that we need an independent lab. That is the only way to properly and independently analyze crime. There is not a middle ground. It has to be an independent lab. That needs to be forefront in all conversations. And sending the rape kits off is great, but now prosecutors are going to have to fly in experts from other states and everywhere where they went, which they can do, but it's just such a Band-Aid solution to the bigger problem. So I just had to jump in because for a year that's been out there. Now, as far as the mental health goes, so I was on the mental health appointment list where you get appointed people that can't afford an attorney for 10 years, from its inception to 10 years later. And what I saw is that I literally don't think I ever saw one single complaint actually filed with any APD with any of my clients, and there was jillions of uses of force. And that's how I know that these numbers are just not even sort of representative of what we're seeing on the front lines. Now, as far as mental health goes, I think that, quite honestly, I believe with the Austin Justice Coalition, and that there needs to be a non-police avenue to deal with some mental health concerns. I think that that would be a huge step forward, because I think it matters where you sit. It matters where you sit on your perspective. And when you come in as a social worker and a mental health advocate, you're going to come in with a way different perspective than a peace officer that comes in that is used to having to be on guard and think in a whole different way. And so I think separating that out would ensure a lot of safety for a lot of community. And I think one of the other things is, as far as the mental health goes, to understand it, we need more accurate, and I think the chief is working on this, information. Because if we're just basing it on self-reporting, the poorest and the weakest don't self-report, and that's who it affects. So it's not representative, and we need representative numbers if we're going to move forward on mental health and more resources. We have no housing. We've got such little funding. There's nowhere for our people to go. After they get out of ASH and get restored to competency, they're spat back out on the street. We have no housing. We've got a crisis with the poor in our community, and that is the reality of the situation.
Well, thank you, Amber. I do want to throw it to Commissioner Trevilian and Councilmember Garza. When you hear those concerns, what are some of the things you think you can do as a policymaker to help either invest in funds or whatever it may be to try to address some of these problems?
You know, at my first budget cycle as a council member, I put a priority on funding for health and human services, and we included one of the largest increases. It was over $6 million to health and human services, which had not been done in a while. And in fact, I talked to former council members who, I feel bad for them, we often throw them under the bus and say, you know, it's that council. But this one council member said, you know, that could have never happened under the old system, and was congratulating the effort, and I'm very grateful for the support from my colleagues who also supported us on that. And I did ask, I remember asking part of that the second year on the budget, and the answer is you have to prioritize funding for that. It comes down to our budget. And second year I asked for 1% from our public safety. Can you give me 1% of your budget? Because as a former firefighter, I've said when we're sending $1 million fire trucks to medical calls that are mental health issues, we're going in the wrong direction. It should never have become a 911 call that a firefighter is in someone's living room giving them medical care. And so that's the way, as policymakers, we need to prioritize that funding. But again, it is tough, especially in Texas, where we're facing a situation where the state could be decreasing the amount of money that we can bring in as a state. So I hope to continue. You know, that's been my big thing, my health and human services funding, and I hope we can continue increasing that or keeping it the same, where we're able to, you know, serve the same amount of people, serve the capacity. I also mentioned the opening of the Judge Herman Mental Health Crisis Center this week is a huge step in the right direction. It's showing that, you know, the route for people in mental health crisis was either jail or the ER, and neither one of those places are equipped to handle those situations. So you can see with that our health district is obviously putting a priority in that, and we're trying to think of creative solutions for this problem.
Well, first of all, we have to recognize that there is no magic bullet. That we have to look at the policies and procedures that are in place now and how they're impacting the communities that we live in. I'll give you an example. When I moved here 32 years ago, 78702 was the place where you could see every health disparity in the city. Highest number of HIV cases, diabetes cases, obesity cases, you name it. If it was bad, tuberculosis, it was there. So when you look 32 years down the road, because it has transitioned and gentrified, the problem has now been moved to 78724, Colony Park, 78725, Austin's Colony. It's not because we created clinics in 78702 that the problem was solved. It is that we displaced the people who had the problem. So we've got to look at the places where people are being sent now and make sure that they have the infrastructure that's necessary to address the problems that we see every day. And that's going to take collaboration and co-location of activities between the school district, the city, and the county. Because when you look at 78724 and 25, they're transportation deserts, they're healthcare deserts, they're food deserts, and all of our Title I kids out there don't have a playground to go to. If you live in Colony Park and you want to play Pee Wee football, you have to go to Maynard. So what we have to do is evaluate the assets that we have. The school district owns property in Colony Park. The city owns property. The county owns property. Some of that property should be land banked so that we can stabilize the value of the dirt right now, because what you see is a number of business entities, corporate entities, wanting to move in that direction. And if we're not careful with the dirt that we own now, you'll see the same thing happen in 78724 that you've seen happen in 78702. And what you see with a lot of our communities that people don't recognize, I went to the St. John Regular Baptist Association, and it's been in place for 150 years. A lot of people that are from those churches came from those outlying communities, and they came because there was no infrastructure there. So we've got to look at the communities that we have, our ETJ, and talk about the infrastructure that we can build there, the jobs that we can train people for, but also we've got to make sure that our kids have something to do during the latchkey hours that will keep them out of the school to prison pipeline. There should be homework centers at every Title I school. A third meal. In Del Valley, over 90% of the kids qualify for a federally funded third meal. And then we need to have enrichment opportunities so that our kids have something constructive to do until their parents get off of work. I haven't had a job that I could get home at 3 o'clock from in 25 years. Yeah. So what are we doing to assess we need an asset map of what we have. We need to identify our top 3 or 4 priorities, and then when we find places where we don't have effective programs, we need to identify the entities, whether they're city-funded, county-funded, or otherwise, and place them in the areas where the disparities are.
And this is awesome. I mean, the fact that we are having this conversation and we can be transparent about the issues that exist, that we can have a back and forth about issues, that's what makes me optimistic that we can continue to move forward in this community and hopefully be a beacon for the rest of the state. I do want to take a moment to go back to our district attorney, who now has a new policy related to officer-involved use of force cases. Can you take a moment and talk about that new policy?
Well, we have a whole presentation on it, so I thought, how do you want to proceed? You want me to just generalize or?
Yeah, if you could do a general, a shorter, like short synopsis, and then we'll go to the presentation.
Yes, it was important to me as I prepared to take office that I address the way that officer-involved incidents were handled by the district attorney's office. I want to emphasize, I appreciate Nelson's impassioned description of the way the law needs to change, because it is the duty of the district attorney to enforce the law. And the law is made in a different place than in my office, okay? Sometimes I wish they'd let me go in there and make it for a while, but they chose not to do that. So I wanted to address this in a way that would build the community's education about the law and how these cases need to be analyzed. And I wanted to do it in a way that would, frankly, maximize the likelihood of an officer being held accountable, both in the grand jury and in front of a petit jury, but at the same time maximize everyone in this community's belief that the system was fair. Everyone would be treated the same. I want the officers to be as confident that they'll be treated fairly in this process too. So we looked at a number of things. I brought on board a man you're about to meet and kept a wonderful woman who you're going to meet to work on these cases. I created a division that would be separate from the rest of the office, independent. They report directly to me. I pledged to go to the scenes myself, and we've had some wonderful early morning conversations. And then I've also decided that I would make the judgment myself as to whether a case should be presented. I felt like, and people can disagree with this, but for me personally, it seemed appropriate that the district attorney make the same kind of decision about these cases that we do in other cases. Do we have enough to present to a grand jury or not? And if we do, we do. If we don't, then we are going to tell the community why not, and tell it in plain terms, presenting the facts so that the community understands the prosecutorial decision. I also decided that when we do present a case in the grand jury, I will make a recommendation to that grand jury as to the legal sufficiency of the case, like we do in other cases. And at the end of the day, we want to, she's saying stop. we want the community to have as much education as we can and access to information, so we're also looking to put a lot of information on our website. So I don't think that's going to be everything, but I do want Dexter and Laurie to be able to go through their presentation. But did you want the chief to do his first?
Yes. So we're going to transition to that portion in just a few minutes, where we're going to have the educational portion in which the police chief will walk through their process, the DA's office will walk through their process. But I wanted everyone to kind of get a brief understanding of your policy. I also wanted to kind of take it away from policy to people, and we've talked about that a lot tonight. And I think one of the questions that I had, and I think that I got from some other people, would be under your new policy. We saw the incident with Breon King. If you
Right.
were a DA at that time, is that something you would have brought to a grand jury?
From what I've seen, yes.
Okay. And then also, under the tragic death of David Joseph, is that something you would have brought to a grand jury?
I don't know as much about the intricacies of that case, but I know it was presented by the last district attorney, and it appears to me from what Laurie has told me that would be one that we would take under our current policy.
Okay.
But that's a little speculative, and I
Yeah.
hate to do that, but I want to answer your question honestly.
Okay. We'll go to Mimi, and then we'll have to transition to part two.
Absolutely. So I just want to just make sure that we elevate race here and understand that race is a factor. That no matter what, holding for socioeconomic issues or holding for lack of education and so forth, race is the issue here. And talking about David Joseph, I sat with David Joseph's mom, and we watched the video over and over and over again. Chaz and I were there inside of her living room crying with her the entire time. Fatima came, encouraged me to knock on the door, So what the community wants to know and what the community wants to hear is moving forward. First off, what chance do we have to survive? That's number one. My brother here wants to know, when can we resist? Why, right? Like, why can't you shoot not to kill? I'm very convinced that although we are doing a fantastic job overall, because the use of force numbers are not, make up for 1%, right, sir? But at the end of the day, even that 1%. So we need to start to measure use of force by measuring non-use of force. What cops are getting it right? How many times is someone pulled over or someone, and there's no instance of use of force? What conversations, what officers are doing this great job, right? So to better understand use of force and measuring use of force, we need to understand how to bring it back to just the basics, to understand what works. So impartiality, competence, transparency, justice. That's what we want. That's all we want.
Thank you.